Perfect. Well, I am so excited. Thanks everyone for coming. Since we started Venture Cafe nearly 2.5 years ago, it has always been a goal of mine to have an entrepreneurship 101 series, so that there was really some type of structured curriculum that we would have as part of Venture Cafe. And we've been very fortunate over the last several months to work with our commercialization team, and then really to get support from the EDA to put this into fruition. But it was really a twinkle in our eye, and it wouldn't be without the hard work of many folks from our commercialization team, as well as Angela McQuillan, our project manager and experience designer, and Thom Webster for helping this idea to turn into a reality. Thom has helped us to create amazing partnerships where we have an opportunity. As of last count, a couple hours ago, nearly 40 folks had signed up for the first OnRamp session, which is just amazing and a testament to the power of what we can all do if we collaborate and work together. So without further ado, I don't want to take any more time. This is an amazing panel that Thom has orchestrated, but Thom is the first founder in residence for the OnRamp program, and we're delighted to have him launch the first session today with all of these amazing founders.
Thank you, Tracy, and hello, everybody. It's good to be here tonight. It is my honor to have the opportunity to be the inaugural founder in residence for the OnRamp program and to present to you this amazing panel we have this evening. As Tracy pointed out, the Science Center in its journey has been looking to do something significant in Philadelphia in terms of how do we better strengthen our startup ecosystem. And as such, we've created and launching this OnRamp program. And what we're looking to do with OnRamp is really create an opportunity that we're going to be convening over the next 8 weeks, a group of experts, startup leaders, subject matter experts, thought leaders to really share their experiences, ideas, drop some wisdom about their journey and how you can benefit, especially if you're looking to start something. So before we get started tonight, just a couple of things is that we want everybody to be able to look at this as an opportunity to really figure out and contribute and be engaged. This is just not going to be an opportunity where we're going to do all the talking. I'm going to kick off tonight with a poll question before I introduce the panel. But we want to look for you to be able to offer new ideas, make suggestions, look at how we could do things differently to not only just make Philadelphia a startup destination, but have real impact and become more inclusive in terms of how we look to support the growth and strengthening and scaling of small businesses. So before we get started, my question that I'm going to ask everybody to think about tonight, and we're going to take a poll, and I want people to respond to this. And the opening poll question is this. In your opinion, Philadelphia's business, economic, and innovation sector leaders are supportive of its local startup ecosystem? Again, in your opinion, Philadelphia's business, economic, and innovation leaders are supportive of its local startup ecosystem. And the responses are strongly agree, you're neutral, you disagree, or you strongly disagree. So that's how we're going to start tonight's discussion and engagement. But in the meantime, while you're responding to this poll, I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves, starting with Jesse from Tezudo.
Okay, well, thanks, Thom. And hi, everyone. I'm Jesse Garcia. I'm the CEO and founder of Tezudo, and we design and manufacture a head impact indicator for concussion awareness. So our patented device attaches to the back of any helmet and goes from clear to red if a user gets hit at a dangerous force level. I've been proudly based in Philadelphia for the past 4 years, but started my company 7 years ago. So I'm excited to share the things I've learned along the way.
Good, Jesse, thank you for that. The other person I am proud to introduce because she's like a daughter to me, and I've known her for such a long time. And she has really elevated the startup question from being a founder to being an organizer of national startup initiatives with some big players, including now being a part of the, we have a struggle with his name, the Meteor network, founded by one of the founders of PayPal and eBay. And so, Ania, introduce yourself to tonight's guest.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here with Rudy and Jesse, who I've had the honor of sharing space with before and have had at our events and have been partners to us. And yes, I live in the Bay Area in San Francisco now, but I grew up in
technical difficulty with something.
Uh-oh. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna keep talking. But yeah, so you know, it's been a journey in startups. You know, starting with me building my own kind of hardware company, Tinsel. We made a necklace that transformed into headphones. And from there, starting Black and Brown Founders, which is a nonprofit that helps Black and Latinx folks start tech businesses. We've done a lot of work in Philadelphia and in the Bay Area and nationally, but specifically we have very strong roots in the West Coast and the East Coast. And now, yeah, as I also co-founded a few other organizations, Zebras Unite, which is really pushing for more alternatives around capital, community, culture, and the startup ecosystem. And now I find myself at Omidyar Network working on their responsible tech team. And I'm really excited to be working on an initiative right now that is here to really try to help bring about new kinds of sectors and ecosystems when we think about technology in particular, and how we want people to show up and be in relationship with each other and do business that's really representative of the kinds of promises that we think, you know, innovation kind of started with, and realizing that and kind of really rooting that in a place of mutualism and understanding how we can use technology and all these new wonderful ideas and energy to actually start to build a better world that's better for everyone. So, yeah.
Ania, thank you for that. And last but not least, you know, one of Philadelphia's startup, you know, success story, who often gets to speak everywhere. So we are proud to have Rudy as a part of our discussion tonight from Switchboard. So Rudy.
Thanks, Thom. I don't know about speaking everywhere, but definitely glad to be here. You know, thanks for the invitation. It's good to see you, Ania, as well. Good to meet you, Jesse. My name is Rudy Ellis. I'm the CEO of Switchboard Live. Born and raised in Philadelphia, went to school in DC, spent time in the Bay Area back in the old gaming days. Actually started my company down in Orlando, Florida. And so that is how I ended up back in Philly. So I moved back here in 2016 with the goal of growing the business, you know, out of Philadelphia, because that was always my goal, right? Is to come and be in an ecosystem that I wanted to be a part of. And so it's been great. The company that we built, Switchboard Live, takes events like this. So it's actually really encouraging to see that you guys are streaming this on Facebook right now. But Switchboard would take this same stream and not only stream it to Facebook, but YouTube, to Twitter, to Twitch, to LinkedIn, to multiple channels, all from one single source. So we built a SaaS application that makes it really easy for anyone, whether you're an individual, you're a small business, you're a church, all the way up to TV stations, to NFL teams. These are the types of clients that are using our product on a day-to-day basis to, at the end of the day, get more eyeballs on their live video. And I'm also a board member on Philly Startup Leaders. So for me, this is a great way to be a part of the Philadelphia ecosystem and share my experiences on raising capital, starting a team, and then helping future founders in the city of Philadelphia. So thanks again for having me.
You're very welcome. So as everyone can see, we have a wide range of participants tonight in terms of our panel. You have Jesse, very new in the startup, and I'm also proud to recognize Jesse as a graduate of the Science Center's Launch Lane Accelerator, which she was one of my companies that I was responsible for mentoring, and she's done a phenomenal job. all the way through Ania and her advocacy across the country, as well as Rudy, who has really emerged as one of Philadelphia startup success stories. So, and looking at Angela, how are we doing on the poll, Angela?
Can you see it?
Yes, we can. So right now, in terms of current poll results, from the question, in your opinions, Philadelphia support of the local startup community, we're looking at 46% saying they agree, 38% are neutral. That's very interesting. And 4% are neutral. So looking at those results, my first question to the panel, what are your thoughts? One, having been a part of Philadelphia startup ecosystem. Two, being based here. Three, having done business here. And what do you see that has been helpful to you? And what do you think the city or the region can do to be more supportive? Whoever would like to start, or shall I call out who wants to be at start first?
I'm happy to chime in first.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Do, Jay.
I was just gonna say, so I'm originally from Jersey. I went to school at Lehigh, so in Bethlehem. So when I wanted to start my business, I actually sought out resources in Philadelphia after doing research for I grew up right around North New Jersey, Manhattan. At the time, there weren't hardware spaces for me to work out of that I really needed to start developing my product. And I found Philly to be such a great place to start a business. Between some of the maker spaces, the University Science Center, I'm closely tied to the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. It's kind of been the opposite. Everyone's been rooting for us and trying to connect us to people. In terms of doing business, it's a big city, so it's hard to get your name out there. But it does seem small once you do get tied to the right people that they can make introductions. So I've been very happy building my business out of here. And in terms of, great talent, access to manufacturing nearby, it's our companies. I'm happy to be based here.
Okay, Rudy, Ania, comment?
Sure, I'll hop in. So for me, actually starting our business down in Orlando, Florida, back in, around 2016, well, actually a little bit before that, kind of with the core team and actually splitting time between locations for a period of time. My goal was to really grow like I said, our sales and marketing team out of Philadelphia. What actually wound up happening is just by way of startups, right? So we no longer have a Florida, office. And so the goal was really now was fortifying what we're doing here. And so for Switchboard, over the past year, during the pandemic, we've actually been hiring. So we have folks that, are in Philadelphia and in Allentown and King of Prussia. So it's for me, it was great to have a home base to be able to grow out of and get talent, for folks that, were out of work or weren't working, obviously during the pandemic. So I'm, really excited to be able to now focus on businesses that can leverage our technology because we're essentially global. So, and we're a SaaS app. So we have people that sign up all day, all times of the night, right? And so it's not really targeted. But now that we have marketing folks on team, so we're starting to do, reach out to different chambers. So we've reached out to different chambers in the city of Philadelphia to just get them exposed to what we're doing. And it's been pretty receptive. So our goal is to double down on these initiatives because, I'm a big believer that all the different types of industries, you have the great examples of those companies here. So whether you're in hardware, whether you're in SaaS, whether you're in fintech, pharma, you can definitely reach out and secure businesses with the companies that are based in Philly.
Good. Thank you for that. I also too see a lot of great questions popping up in the chat. And what we're going to do towards the end of our 30-minute discussion with our panelists is open it up to those questions. So feel free to keep the questions popping in the chat. But right now, let me turn to Ania. Ania, get your thoughts on the poll question.
Yeah, I think I'm coming at this with a slightly different lens because I'm the one person on the panel who's not living in Philadelphia right now, even though I do spend time there. But I think that, having come and organized, North Star is the thing I'm thinking about. So the conference that we did in 2018, it was in partnership with the city of Philadelphia, with the Department of Commerce too. And I think that it was a really important and pivotal moment and lesson for me. I think that my answer to the question that you posed is that I agree in the terms of like A for effort, in terms of whether the actual results are where they should be today. Like, there's definitely still room for improvement. I like to think about kind of like 3 key factors as things that I feel like are really important when we talk about what is needed to really help with innovation and kind of creating and building up these ecosystems. So community, opportunity, and safety. And I feel like there's a really strong community. There's a lot of people that are connected, but there's a question about, if you just showed up here today, or maybe you just haven't been a part of that kind of in group, like how easy is it for you to plug in and understand like who is going to help you get the things that you need. I think that the other big thing is access to funding, regardless of whether you're networked in or networked out. Are people actually getting the kinds of support financially that they need to be able to jumpstart their businesses? This is an issue kind of looking across the country, just in terms of, we live in a time where there's just growing divide. And like most Americans, like most people are broke. And so people are starting these businesses, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes not, but they don't have a ton of risk that they can take on financially, especially if we're talking about younger generations like millennials. Like we didn't get to inherit all the wonderful policies that were growing in an economy during the kind of 50s and 60s and 70s. So it's a really different landscape for us. We have to tackle these problems differently, and I think that there's just sort of been a little bit of a one-size-fits-all approach that really needs to be reevaluated. And the last thing I will say is just contracts. Like, if you're not giving funding, like who's showing up to actually make deals with these startups to give them the opportunity for them to actually do their thing. So those are the things that actually even respond to Anne's questions that I would look at as major indicators of support.
Wow, we have a range of responses there, and all that's very good and very insightful. One of the things that we see as related to, based on the discussion and feedback from our panelists, is that Philadelphia has a tendency to be known as a city of neighborhoods. And as a city of neighborhood, we often are siloed in our individual communities. And one of the things that we're looking at the Science Center, which is often looked at as a West Philly University City institution, is how do we do more across the city? Or as we like to put it, there's an initiative we want to launch, founded by the new Vice President, Aaron Serrata, about how do we cross the street? How do we go into other communities and bring our services and make better connections to talk about how do we improve and drive what Philadelphia needs to do to become a city, a first-class city, especially in building startups. So I'd like to thank the panel for that response. So in building on that, from your experiences, let me just ask the 3 of you questions, having had started, being a founder, starting a venture, what were some of the mistakes that you made that you would want to share with people? And what are often some of the mistakes you see other founders made that are things that are important that people should be considered, especially as part of the conversation and thinking about starting any type of venture? Jesse started first last time. Rudy, let me throw the ball to you.
Sure. I would say probably one of the biggest mistakes would be trying to essentially boil the ocean, right? Do too many things at the very beginning. I mean, one of the biggest things that you have as a startup is time, right? So it's time, and then obviously what you need to kind of build businesses obviously is capital. So I would say, and we were one of those folks that we tried to do a lot of what we thought was business or ways to get additional business, but in actuality, it was really just shiny object syndrome. So I would say, really focusing on what your 30, 60, 90, 6 months, just goals to get you to that next milestone so that you can have trackable traction, because those are the things that, one, you need to do, and then two, if it does make sense to go out for funding, you're going to want to have, a story, right? Here's what we set out to do, we accomplished that. Here's what we set out to do next, we accomplished that. So long-winded would be, try not to boil the ocean. Keep it narrow, keep it focused, achieve those, those initial milestones, and then kind of proceed from there.
Good. Ania, your thoughts on the question?
Yeah, I would say, looking back on my experience building Tinsel, I think that one thing I would have done differently was actually focus more of my time that I spent pitching investors, actually trying to navigate more meetings and potential strategic partnerships with other operators in the space. I think that, there's a lot to kind of unpack to the thing that we were talking about earlier with funding. And, everybody needs at least a little bit of something to kind of get started and get something off the ground to kind of prove that they have an idea that's worth, pouring gasoline on it. And I think that, there was a lot that I had misconceptions about early on in terms of the role that investors could and should play in the business that I was trying to build, where I think that, there's a lot of really smart and intentional, VCs that are out there, but in general, they're just not going to know your business in the ways that you know your business. And I felt like I probably would have gained more actually trying to look at a strategic investment from other like hardware or electronics kind of like manufacturers that were in my space that were actually setting the pace and the direction of where the industry was going, and actually could have, I could have made a case for maybe new revenue streams that would have been good for their business and that kind of thing. So anyway, that's like my after the fact, I wish I would have. But I would say generally the one other thing I would say is that I see an advice I would give is like, solving a problem for a community that you're from or have like meaningful access to, alongside what Rudy pointed out with boiling the ocean. One of the other things that I see happen a lot is folks have an idea for something that like this could be big and like there's so much money in this space and like there's a problem and I'm gonna solve it. And I'm like, okay, yeah, but like the other part of that is that if you don't actually like have a role or a meaningful connection to that community, one, you're not going to solve the problem in the most effective way for what that community is experiencing. You just are not knowledgeable enough about how they experience it to come up with the best solution 9 times out of 10. And two, like when it's time for you to sell your solution, if you don't actually know people that are part of that community, like how are you going to make money? Like you kind of need to both be part of it to come up with the right solution and also be part of it to know who you're going to sell your solution to. So, yeah.
I think that's actually a perfect segue to Jessie, and just in terms of how she came up with her idea and share with everybody here tonight, not only how you came about up with 2.0 and your first medical device, but also two, your experiences and challenges you've had in just getting it launched.
Yeah, there's a lot. So, but no, I was a rugby player and, my coach didn't know when to pull me out from the game. And because of it, I had post-concussive symptoms for 6 months afterwards. And, there was only an electronic mouth guard at the time. It cost like $300. I was going through like 3 or 4 a season. And I was like, there's no way I could afford this. So that's why I was like, all right, I want to make something that's affordable that'll just tell you when you're hurt. And there was a big disconnect at first with investors because they're like, who can't afford a $300 mouth guard? And I'm like, if I talk to the local teams in our area, like that's what they spend on their entire fit for like the season. So I think one thing I've seen founders do a lot, or like there's so much glorification and like raising capital. And, I've seen people like quit their job and like throw everything into it, which, okay, like you want to have like a ton of skin in the game, but I did it the opposite. Like when I first started off, people thought I was a little crazy because I had like model magic type prototypes going around. But I worked full time as long as possible, like saved as much money as I could to start the business. And maybe that's because people didn't think I should be in manufacturing or one of those cases. But I feel like that's where a lot of people fail is like they go into it way too fast. because that's kind of what you see on like Shark Tank and whatever is like out there on the media. So my journey's been a lot slower in terms of getting to where we're at now, which is selling an actual product. But I think it's helped me not like close the doors, to say the least. And we've had to have like a lot of alternate routes for capital, such as doing Kickstarters and like manufacturing our own device instead of outsourcing that. So I'm not sure if you want me to go into all those details right now, but I definitely see a lot of failure with other founders, just like following a pathway that's not theirs.
Yeah. And, that kind of leads ourselves to the question I really want to ask next and get feedback from the panel, because it lends itself to the whole idea of when you're looking to solve a problem, solving that problem, you got this idea for a product. And, the big buzzword in the innovation community is MVP, and what it takes to get there and how much it costs and, what's the path for it and how do I figure that out and how do I use it to justify market validation and engage customer experience. So, looking at that from the perspective, I just want to ask you the next question is that how did you approach creating your own MVP and how did you figure out, what it would take to create it and how many generations did it take you to get to at least what you thought was going to be the product you could bring to market, at least get somebody to buy? So who would ever like to start first?
I feel like that's a long answer that I want to try to distill down, but I feel like Jessie, like she's like given like golden nuggets right now in terms of folks that are trying to build hardware. As someone who's been there and done that, I think that Jessie is incredibly savvy in how she's been thinking about it. And I also just want to emphasize that there is no one right way to do it. And I think that one of the things that just exists in the world of startups in general is like a really kind of specific narrative of like what it looks like to do it the right way. Like I feel like there's kind of a gravity around building your company in a certain kind of way that might be espoused by like, the kind of Y Combinator kind of like accelerators or whatever. And it's just like, it is like some people can build it that way. Most people probably can't build it that way. And I get like in my feelings sometimes because I feel like I meet and talk to entrepreneurs all the time who feel like they're doing something wrong because they're not doing it the way that like, I don't know, Mark Andreessen tweeted about it. And it's just like, seriously, like Mark Andreessen does not know everything. So anyway, I just like had to say that. But the thing I was going to say about the MVP part is like, I mean, my approach in some ways wasn't terribly different from how Jessie's talking about it. Like I literally built, a Frankenstein kind of prototype at first, especially with hardware. Like it's an expensive business to be in when you start having to make physical products. And like, my very first prototype was like, literally, I went to like Radio Shack and I went to Michael's craft store and I bought beads and I bought headphones and I like had this like janky looking thing that was just like, I just need to like form it into something that I can like show it to someone and tell them what I mean when I say a necklace that transforms into headphones. And then from there, it allowed me, once I got coupled up with like an industrial designer that could like make a design that looked, more aesthetically pleasing and actually like had also experience with designing headphones and could do something more practical. It gave her something to start from and being like, oh, okay, this is where we're going with that. And then from there, we were able to kind of work with factories and their engineering teams to kind of turn that design into, the actual functional prototypes that we needed and going into production. But again, those were things that were really possible on our side because we had some backers, we had some financing for that. And if I wouldn't have had that, I think like now there's so many more tools that allow you to do lots of like rapid prototyping and things like that. And so I feel like when you're in hardware, you're really just like trying to get from milestone to milestone in terms of like, okay, I got it to work. Now, is this something that I can do like 100,000 times? Because also sometimes in hardware, like your prototype, you can make one of those, but that doesn't mean you can make that at scale. So there's just all kinds of considerations. Like I have a special place in my heart for hardware founders because it's a different path for us, and Jesse's doing God's work. That's all I have to say.
Well, let me, before Rudy, I get to you, I want to expand on that between Ania and Jesse for a minute, because, knowing both of their experiences intimately, I would like for them to share some nuggets they learned from their experience, where Jesse ended up learning how to manufacture and produce it herself, where Ania went the route of going to China, finding manufacturer, going through the whole quality control issue and having that experience also too. So I would like for both of you to kind of just share, a little bit with the audience tonight, what you learned and why you went the way you did, just in terms of building out your product. Jesse, let's start with you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for all those kind words too, Ania. It's definitely, hardware is hard. But I do love it now that I'm like in this game. And in talking about like how much did you spend on an MVP, like my goal was always like as little as possible and like as cheaply as possible. Like I said, I literally started off with like model magic. Like this was like my first prototype that I would take to people out there. And, like I would start hitting roadblocks, like, okay, like model magic is great, but it's not enough. Like, all right, now I have to start 3D printing. And my thought process was like, there's no guarantee if I spend this money with a manufacturer that I actually get what I want out of it. So instead I invested in like education and training for myself. So like I went back to school, I went to community college, I took a class on like 3D modeling. So then I was like, all right, I have that skill set now to like design and like 3D print. Eventually I brought people on, like interns from colleges that I could do, but I took classes on how to like CNC machine. And when it came to inject, like once we got like the prototype for injection molding, like we got quotes back. It was like $50,000 for like tooling. And I was like, I don't even know if this is going to work. So instead I bought a machine on eBay that was $1,000. I refurbished it with my CTO. It took us 6 months, so I'm not saying like it was an easy feat, but then we're like, all right, we could do our entire Kickstarter run on this machine instead. So like I have just been super duper scrappy, and I've used those skill sets to like, basically on the side, I was side hustling. I was like, 3D printing stuff for other people and like doing design work once I got those skills. But it's that type of grittiness that like helped me get through, because at least for us, like no one believed me that I could make a device that could detect forces without electronics. Like it was a really hard, like, okay, like you could do it type of thing. But it was a really big struggle. And like, that's why I think, I loved my pathway, because I do feel like, whether Tezuda is a success or not, like I learned so much. It will be a success because I'm very determined, but like it's I invested in myself during this entire time, and like now like I know how to do things I never thought I would as like a global studies major in college.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Can I just say how much joy like Jesse's story gives? Like this is the stuff that gives me life, because I know what it's like to be there. In fact, my story is having had paid like $30,000 for tools that we couldn't even effing use, because we found out that doing the like injection method, like we couldn't get the polish of the aluminum. We basically ended up having to CNC it at the end of the day. We spent $30,000 on tools we could never use. So like, anyway, sorry, I know we're speaking a lot of hardware jargon, but like it's real, it's really real. And that's like the thing, like when you're making physical products, like there's like all these variables that you just couldn't have possibly known until it's already there, and until it's like in some cases already shipped out to people and they're already using it in a case that you didn't try. And it's like, well, it exists. It's not like you can just overnight patch and now it's fixed. Like that does not happen in the world of physical products. So like it's a special hell, but it's also like the most invigorating, exciting kind of like creation that you can do, because it physically changes the way that people interact in the world, like the way that they behave and show up and do actual things. It transforms their lives in a really different tactical kind of way, and that's also really rewarding. And I'd love to get like Rudy's like thoughts on MVP in here too, because I feel like one of the things that, you know, most of the time when I'm helping startups, they're not hardware startups, they're building software. And I think that when I try to tell them around like building your first prototype or your MVP or whatever it is you're going to go out and try to, you know, make your first dollars with, is again just like trying to be as scrappy as possible, like trying to keep in mind what it is that like you're trying to accomplish, like what's the most important thing. Like there's these 3 questions that Tara Reid, who has a company called Apps Without Code, and has spoken at some of the Black and Brown Founders events. Like she has these 3 questions, like, do people want this? Will they pay you money for it? And like, why are they paying you money? Like those are the 3 questions you have to answer. And until you know the 3 questions to that answer, like, do they want it? Will they pay me money for it? Why are they paying me money? Like you just keep doing, like keep wash, rinse, repeat until you know. And just like really helping that be a thing that like focuses you on what it is that you're trying to actually solve and how you're solving it.
Well, Rudy, Ania passed you the ball, so care to respond?
Well, it sounds like software isn't hard, but software is hard too. So I just want to put that out there. It think about a ton of time in code, and I'm not even a coder, so I see it from the team. I think for me, it's actually, Ania made a great point earlier about being in the community, and that's really the product that we built was solving a need for a customer that came to me and said, "Hey, Rudy, you know, we have 2 destinations. We have our website and this conference, and we don't have 2 computers, 2 cameras, 2 people. We don't have all this like the bandwidth. Is there a way where I could send this one video and it go to both of them at the same time?" And I'm, you know, me being a techie, I was like, well, I don't think so, but there should be a way to do that. And that was the itch for me. So that weekend I went home and built this rudimentary like little server that I said, Paul, you send video here, it would do exactly what you want. And then it was, well, is like, to your point, how much would you pay for this, right? I didn't even have, you know, a concept of like what this would bear in market. But the cool thing was he was able to kind of help validate the value to him, which was time, productivity, potential revenue, because he had video in 2 locations. And so that was really enough for me to kind of start thinking about, are there other folks that are like Paul? Are there personas that could have these same type of issues? And then when I took a step back, I started realizing it like, yeah, this is applicable to, you know, different segments, different types of customers. And that was enough for me to kind of want to go and build the validation for this. It didn't even happen until like a year later, right? This wasn't something where it was like overnight. So it was one of those things where I solved this problem and I moved on, but it was always in the back of my mind about like, are there other folks that have this type of need? And so that was enough to kind of just start looking at, you know, different areas. And I'm trying to think, I believe I was having a conversation with a gentleman that they were building websites, right? They were building websites in like the house of worship space. And one of the things they were looking to do was add more like live content. So, you know, my whole background is live streaming. And we were supposed to have a follow-up conversation about just live and things that you could do. And while I was sitting on this phone call that never happened because he thought I was coming into his office and I'm waiting on, you know, just a regular landline, you know, calling number, I'm looking at all the different like niche streaming platforms for the house of worship space. But then you had, this is a couple of years back now, you had Ustream, you had Justin TV, you had YouTube, you had all these platforms where all the eyeballs were. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, why can't your content reach this mass? And that's what, at the end of the day, what you want. And that was like, for me, my aha moment, and it clicked. And I was like, well, wait a minute, it's no different than what I did for Paul. And so like that really started the process of me validating that. And, to Jesse's and Nia's point was, how can I get something in someone's hands as soon as possible with the least amount of code, website development. And so I hung that phone up, and that was the start, right? That was the start of validating, that initial idea, because it's never going to be perfect. You want to get the feedback, you want to get it in folks' hands so that you can get that feedback to make sure that what you're building is the right building, not based on what you want to build, but it's actually going to the right hand. So, and that took about a year for that to actually really happen.
Can I just like plus one something really specific that Rudy was talking about with feedback?
Yeah, please do. Go ahead.
I love talking about like feedback loops, like not just in the scheme of developing technology and startups, but just like in terms of like the human brain. I love nerding out on neurology stuff too, which actually applies there too. But like just in the context of this conversation, feedback loops are so important. Like I keep telling people too that like before you launch, like, or anything that you like, the kind of methodology that we have, like Black and Brown Founders, we have a boot camp to help people kind of get from idea to launching. And we'd spend some time talking about solving problems for communities that you have access to, like doubling down on the things you have, not on the things you don't have, right? Like that it's really about aligning all of your skills and what you have and what you're bringing to the table, who you can serve and have access to sell your solution to, and like finding just that sweet spot to how you kind of develop that solution. But in the process, when people are building the prototype, they have some hypothesis of like, if I build this thing, then it's going to solve some problem, right? And that like we kind of really try to help people think through, even before they launch, how you're building these feedback loops into your process. So like making sure that you have some indicator to see if like the thing that you thought was going to happen like is happening or not, because otherwise you won't know how to iterate on your product, right? Like you want to test your hypothesis with your MVP, and you need to have some mechanism to see if that is actually working or not. So then okay, that's not working, I need to try a different approach. Or, oh, I was actually asking the wrong question. Actually, the answer is over here somewhere. But just doing the things and throwing the spaghetti at the wall, that's something you can do when you have a lot of money. But if you are like cash strapped and trying to be lean and agile, like you have to optimize for what you don't have in cash with like having really deep knowledge about your product and your customer and the problem.
Yeah.
I want to add to that. We recently did a lifetime deal with a small subset of customers where we were advertising folks to come and use this product, and it allowed us to just get immediate feedback from them. And what it validated is these people are 100% not our customers. And so like, even though they have our product for life, we're going this route. And that was a great way for us to validate who we shouldn't be selling to, who we shouldn't be marketing to, because their perception of what we were providing for them really, it was not perceived as the same way we were putting it out in the world. So you're 100% correct. Like that was one of the great examples to really validate why we're not going to be selling to these types of customers.
Mm-hmm. Jesse, you wanted to add to the conversation.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with like the feedback loops. Like I'm a big fan of like fail fast, fail often, like try to like put things out there and get feedback on it like immediately. Like I know if we didn't get into that habit, our product would have been something that our end users wanted to use, because what I had in mind in the beginning was completely different than what it looks like and functions like today. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like that is something that I keep doing, I guess I should say. Like, it doesn't really stop. Like, because even with some of the customers that we are working with now, like, they're helping us get better. And the one thing that is free is like being an empathetic listener. If you are an actual good listener and ask good questions, like that could take you so far without having a ton of money to like, develop 3 things that are perfect. And if it's perfect, it's probably too late for you to actually show that to someone. So I think it's really important during the MVP process.
All great feedback from everybody. And I see we got a lot of great questions popping up into the chat. So before we get to the questions, I just want to ask the 3 of you one more question before we open up to the questions from our attendees tonight. And part of your journey in getting to where you got in terms of building your business and launching your venture, somewhere along there you had to make decisions that you could no longer do it by yourself, and you had to decide on, people to bring on board, maybe even co-founders to team up with, and the type of talent you wanted to surround yourself with. What was your decision-making process to start thinking about how you approach that? And, what was some of the, and how did you arrive at that? And what were some of the early decisions that you made in terms of the type of people you either went into joint business with or looked to hire? Rudy, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. For me, when I was at that, that point of, all right, here's something that I want to go and pursue. What are the things that need to be built? I actually took a path out of Jesse's book and said, I dust off some of the programming skills. I said, well, I know we're going to need a website. We're going to need a form. We're going to need these things. But while I was doing that, I was also looking for that tech co-founder, right? And so I started reaching out to people in my network that I had, a high value of their work, like that I worked with in the past, trying to understand, like, here's the skill set that I think we need. Here's what I'm looking for. Do you know anyone that can help me with this? And by doing that, I actually landed my co-founder by just getting him as a referral, right? So it was crazy because I wasn't reaching out to him to be the co-founder, but once he heard the idea, it checked a bunch of boxes. That was enough for him to kind of say, hey, this is pretty interesting. I would be interested in, pursuing this a little bit more. And it took time. It was like a date. I was like dating him for a couple months because, they're going to be with you through thick and thin. They're going to be with you through all of these elements. So you want to make sure that this person that's, that has a vested interest, to a certain degree, to your idea, they're going to be with you through that. And one thing I did learn is, especially if it's your idea, no one's going to be as passionate about your idea as you are, right? I mean, yeah, it's great to have people that are on board with it and want to, be a ride or die. But at the end of the day, take your time. You want to make sure it's the right person and you gel well together, because it essentially is a marriage as you move forward.
Jesse, you mentioned early on how you and your CTO built your first molding device. So, how did you team up with her?
Yeah, so I teamed up with Chris. So actually early on with Tezuda, I was in grad school. And at first I was going to partner and have a co-founder that I was just really close friends with. And they were, interested in the idea, things like that. But early on, so this is kind of a lesson learned, thankfully, I wrote out this contract on my own, not by a lawyer, but just kind of hey, let's do a little vesting schedule and make sure this works. And thankfully I did. This was even before I brought on my CTO, mostly because we had the exact same skill set. I was creative. I had a little bit of a business background. I did this master's in technical entrepreneurship. So it was half product design, half business. And he had the same exact background. So even though we got along great and he was a friend, he wasn't the right person for my business. So I would say just be thoughtful of what do you do really well and what do you really need for your team. So that was kind of the first misstep or almost misstep that I took. But then the person I really did need was a strong CTO. And when I met Chris, he had a master's in mechanical engineering, a background in finance, he loved all things mechanical and making them work. And he was he's actually not an athlete by any means. So he wasn't as passionate about injuries or concussions like I was. But he loved making things. And with him, we made this possible. So like I said, I think really knowing what I didn't know was the key to finding the right second in command or our CTO right now.
Nia.
Yeah, I'm Rudy and Jesse already have given so much great advice. I want to both echo Rudy's comments about, co-founders are like spouses. They are, and they are like, co-founder is an emotional title, right? Like it's something that really speaks more to the relationship of somebody to the business than it does anything else. And I think that it's a really important and hefty title, because it is like one that like literally, you know, kind of teasing that out and separating that after you've made that decision is a bit like a divorce. And so so the other thing that I want to kind of point out that Jesse mentioned too, which I think is important and is something that I did with you know, with my co-founder when I was starting Tinsel, is like having an actual agreement between us. I think that it's really important before stakes get high, like before any of the action really starts happening, to have conversations to like really be explicit about what is going to happen. Like if something went completely sideways, like who's going to have like the final decision on whatever, like all of that stuff, when there's no crazy tense moment happening, like that's the time to have the conversation. Like, you know, like writing your will is a great thing to do when you're healthy like that. So I feel like having that in writing is also just really important. It gives you something to go back to when you're in tough times, because there are definitely going to be tough times if you're a startup founder. And then, yeah, on team, I think like, yes, it's like, to me, it's mostly been looking for folks who have like a missing piece of the puzzle that I'm looking for, and also are just like really great problem solvers. Like I tend to look for people that I feel like have like a raw kind of skill set and just have good intuition and are really resourceful, more than I'm just like, well, did they get a master's in this thing, right? Like, and I feel like that stuff always helps, but I really try to look beyond at just the very different ways that people can show up and know things and have experience with things that are helpful for accomplishing a given goal. And then the last thing I guess I would add on top of like Rudy and Jesse's amazing advice is to not be shy about structuring like unconventional kind of relationships and arrangements with people who you want to work with. So I know one of the other challenges that a lot of startups have is needing someone technical or wanting someone technical to help them with the project. And, you know, the person that they need or want, or the kind of skill set they're looking for is someone who's like quite advanced and sophisticated and very experienced. And like, you want to get, like, for instance, my husband, he's like director of engineering he's been director of engineering at many places. And lots of people are like, can I talk to your husband? I want to tell him about my startup idea. Maybe he might be. And I'm like, he's probably not going to quit his very well-paid job to do your startup because he's not passionate about that. But there are things that like he will listen and he'll be passionate about. He's like, okay, I'm not going to join your startup, but I can help advise you. Like I can help you solve this problem, you know? So I'm like, I think that people also don't have to feel like it's all or nothing. If you manage to get connected to someone that has a specialized skill set that you need and you can't just like hire them, making them an advisor, or they might just be someone who's just like, look, I don't have that much time, but I'll do an hour call with you. You can just run down your list of problems and I'll tell you the answers to them or what I've seen before. And that might be like literally the difference. Or just bartering with people where like, you know, I feel like Jesse kind of gave an example. It's just like, you know, maybe you know how to like see something and they needed a prototype of something else, and like they know how to do like good branding and they're going to do your branding for you and you're going to make them some, you know, some 3D printed jewelry or something. Like just really think about what things you have available to you, not just money.
Yeah. Can I just chime in on that? Like I can agree, like Chris, like our CTO is like part-time right now. So it's the same thing. Like he works nights and weekends, but like his job is too good. But like when we're ready, like he'll come on. And then the other thing is don't get caught up with like the degrees and like the accolade, like all that stuff. Like I know early on it was like, oh, like, you know, trying to get like the best person, you know, on paper, but in reality, it's like startups are like all hands on deck, and like that mindset does not work with everyone. So if you're able to actually find someone, like some of the best people that have worked for us are like, you know, community, like associates, like things like that people are like take for granted, like it's not from Stanford or whatever. I don't know. It's really like a mindset, and some people have it and some people don't. And that's who thrives in these types of crazy environments.
Agreed.
Yes, all good stuff. And we have had such an engaging conversation. Time has flown by, and we actually don't have time to get to any of the questions in the chat. That's unfortunate, because we have another session starting in 4 minutes, and I've been given notification to wrap this up. So really, I want to do it just in closing.
Hey,
is
Tom,
get some.
just so you know, I run the next session. So if you need to go a little over, I'm sitting right here. It's okay. You can answer some questions if you'd like.
Well, all right, man. Well,
Oh,
you heard it from the man himself. That was Aaron, who's head of commercialization now for the Science Center. So we have some time to go over. So with that understanding, I tell you what, why don't we, I think Emily and Natalie, you have been monitoring the chat.
Yes. And we only actually had one question that I saw.
Okay.
Feel free to add questions to the chat if anybody has them. But the question that I saw was from Anne. And she asked, how should we measure startup support? Funds or space cheerleading as a % of what? And that was a question that came through early on in the session. So feel free to weigh in on that.
Whoever wants to jump in, Ania, Rudy, Jesse, in response to Anne's question.
I can jump in real quick. I sort of attempted to like touch on this earlier, but I would say that, you know, generally I would say networks, I would say hires and wires happening, contracts that are really getting, you know, like who is giving these startups contract opportunities? Like, are the businesses, like, are we creating ways and pathways and incentives and programs where there's going to be more exchange in business happening between startups and more established businesses in a given ecosystem? And then also just like access to funding is another big one that I think about.
Okay, Jesse, Rudy, do you have something to add to that?
I would say Nia, I think she hit the nail for me. Yeah, I don't have anything else to add to that. I was just gonna say thanks for the time. This was a great session to be a part of.
If I may, I'd love to ask a question if I could.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, so there's, I mean, other than money, we hear that number that come up all the time, but what are resources that could be in Philadelphia that don't seem to be here that, you know, should be here?
You know, it's interesting. I'm interested to hear Jesse and Rudy's response to this, but like, I don't know that there's anything that Philadelphia doesn't have that it needs. One thing I would reframe it, because I feel like I see this a lot, and I'm even seeing this right now with like all these VCs from the Valley are like flocking to Miami right now, and I'm just like, ew, like just leave Miami alone. But to me, I'm just like, because what ends up happening is that there's so many cities that are just like, let's look at Silicon Valley and let's replicate what they're doing here. And I'm like, please don't do that. Don't do that at all. Like, there are lessons to learn from Silicon Valley, but there are also a lot of things that like we just don't do great. We don't do great. And it's like all of the things that don't make it into the headlines and like on the stock exchange, but it's really the parts that like ravage communities and the fabric of what makes like a really healthy city that people just feel good about living in. And I think that like Philadelphia has a lot of that. And I just would hate for that to like become degraded because of it trying to like fit a different model onto itself. So the advice that I have and the way that I think about it is more around like, how does Philadelphia kind of rise up into its own flavor of what innovation looks like and how it can start to really spark that and support that in the things that are the strengths of Philadelphia. Like, I feel like it's not about what Philadelphia doesn't have. It's like Philadelphia has everything it needs. How does Philadelphia really like dig into that and like make that the thing that like nobody is gonna, like, you can have the same ingredients, you can try that recipe, but the sauce isn't gonna taste the same because like Philly's is unique, you know, like that's what I want to see.
Yeah.
All right. Jesse, Rudy, you want to respond to that?
Well, go ahead, Jesse.
Oh, sorry, Rudy. I don't know. I keep thinking about Philly and like what you said, Ania. And what keeps resonating with me is like the idea of like contracts and partnerships and how like that would be so unique for Philly. Cause like they're like the funding, like funding's one aspect, and we know that's like a hurdle in itself, but like the idea of like Philly really supported Philly like based companies and made getting contracts like like, I know, for example, like I'm trying super hard to get a partnership with like the Philadelphia school district with my thing. And if I could do that, like that would be awesome, but it's not, it hasn't been an easy pathway. Like I think for that. And I think that would be unique for this city if we really like put an emphasis of trying to get contracts for startups in the area. But that's the one that's standing out. And besides that, like, I do really think we have a little bit of everything in this ecosystem, maybe not a lot of early stage funding opportunities. There's like growth and like Series A stuff, but I like that one as an expansion potential.
Mm-hmm. Rudy.
Yeah, what I was going to add was with regards to, for a person that has that idea of like where to start, right? So you have different resources, throughout the city, is being able to make sure that the different pockets, the different, resources that are here to help folks start off, is have whether it's a welcome wagon, a portal, just a direction. Because I think back to when I started the company, is like, I didn't know where to go or what to do. And so you spend a ton of time researching and trying to figure out, the things that you need and where to go. And so like, when you talk about Philly, maybe there's this official, like, here are like the first 5 things that you need to do to think about that. And then being able to connect to the different partners and different, platforms that within the city, and knowing why to do that, I think could be, something where I think from a challenge standpoint is something that we probably need to tackle a little bit better. Just kind of coming here and already not being a part of the ecosystem. That's where I think part of the challenge is for me, just, starting off as well.
Great question, great answers. I want to thank our panelists for participating tonight, because one of the big takeaways, especially from the last question that was asked by Aaron, is that as I launched this conversation tonight, is that coming together and looking at how we make OnRamp something, and more impactful for Philadelphia, is that how do we continue to leverage and build on what we already have? It's known as a city with great assets, with great potential, but how do we build on that? And especially really as related to the poll question, which results were mixed. How does the existing business community and economic leaders better support startup? I mean, the suggestion that Rudy made, in terms of having a single point of destination where we can go all information startup. The point that Jesse and both Ania, elaborated on, contract opportunities, and having been a small business owner in the city for 30 years, I can tell you for a fact that businesses that I built here, my businesses were outside of Philadelphia, not in Philadelphia. So there is that hurdle there is that barrier there. And I think that, and put it in Ania's word, if we figure out how to double down and really support business here, gives them a destination where they can get information to be successful and connect them to resources that they can grow and scale, we can turn Philadelphia into a place where people want to come versus other parts of the country. Again, I want to thank everybody for participating tonight. Thank the Science Center for really launching this initiative. Join us back here next week, where we will start our weekly workshops around supporting businesses, and we'll be bringing in more subject matter experts to talk about how we build Philadelphia's startup ecosystem and strengthen it in a way that's going to allow it to be successful. Also, one more commercial plug for OnRamp. At the end of these last 8 weeks, we will be doing a pitch competition, and we ask everybody to sign up. Winner that night, which will be July the 6th, I believe. It will be in July, the first week of July, first Thursday in July. The winner that evening of the pitch competition will be given $5,000 towards their startup vision. $5,000, that's the Science Center Startup Stimulus. So again, thank you for joining us here on OnRamp. We'll see you next week.